We are live. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our virtual Lit Live event with Village Books. I am Claire. I'm the event coordinator at Village Books in Bellingham, Washington, and Linden, Washington. And before we get started, there are a couple things I want to tell you about Crowdcast. If you've never been on a Crowdcast event before, if you look in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there's a green follow button. If you click on that, you will see all of the events that we have coming down the road. We do have a lot scheduled, some on Crowdcast, some on Zoom. If you're interested in any events that we're hosting on Zoom, you can go to villagebooks.com and find out. And speaking of events coming up, day after tomorrow, on Tuesday, at 7 p.m., we are going to be hosting Hank Lentfer and Kathleen Dean Moore as part of our Nature of Writing series in partnership with the North Cascades Institute. Hank Lentfer wrote Raven's Witness, The Alaska Life of Richard K. Nelson. So he's going to be in conversation with one of our favorite Pacific Northwest authors, Kathleen Dean Moore. And again, that is on Tuesday. I also want to say thank you to any of you who contributed to this event at the registration page. While our events are all free, thankfully we're still able to offer free events to everyone. We do appreciate the folks who kick in a few dollars at registration just to support our programming in this very challenging time. So thank you. We do appreciate it. And if you didn't, don't sweat it, no problem. Like I said, we're glad that we can still offer this free programming. So let's see, we're going to keep the chat enabled, that little conversation that's going on the right-hand side of the screen. We're going to keep that up throughout the event today because we do encourage engagement throughout the reading tonight. If there's any feedback you want to give or any questions you want to ask, you just go ahead and type that into the chat and our authors will be watching that. So I encourage you, and they encourage you to have that engagement because that's the best we can do to create kind of as intimate of an event as we can in this virtual domain that we find ourselves in right now, right? So, but I do want to remind you that the virtual readings gallery is a safe space. Any user exhibiting offensive, hateful, or inappropriate behavior will be dismissed from the event immediately. Another important feature on this screen is this one right in the middle here that says Purchase Books Here. If you click on that link, it takes you straight to the Village Books website and the page where our authors' books are listed. So if you are feeling inspired today and by what you hear and you want to purchase the books, just click on that green button right there and it's going to take you straight to our website where you can support the authors and support an independent bookstore at the same time, and we would appreciate it. So, and if you happen to be watching this event recorded on YouTube, if you look down below in the description, you'll see that same link straight to the Village Books website. Okay, so, and now for our poets this evening. Alexandra Teague is most recently the author of, or what we call Desire, this one right here. Her prior books are The Wise and Foolish Builders and Mortal Geography, which was winner of the Lexi Rudnitsky Prize and the California Book Award. And she's also the author of the novel, The Principles Behind Flotation. She also co-edited Bullets into Bells, Poets and Citizens Respond to Gun Violence. She's a former Stegner and NEA fellow and recent fellow at, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, Civitella Ranieri. Alexandra is a professor at University of Idaho. And then with her this evening, we have Elizabeth Vignali. She's the author of Object Permanence and Endangered Animal. That's this one right here. She's the co-author with Cami Westhoff of Your Body a Bullet, and her work has appeared in Willow Springs, the Cincinnati Review, Mid-American Review, Tinderbox, the Literary Review, and others. She lives in the Pacific Northwest, where she works as an optician, and she co-produces the Bellingham Kitchen Session series and serves as poetry editor of the Sweet Tree Review. Both of these women do a lot, and I am so privileged and feel very excited to introduce them to you tonight. So please, a round of applause, a warm welcome for Alexandra Teague and Liz Vignali.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm really excited about this. I've never gotten to see Village Books in person, so I'm excited to do the virtual visit to start with, and I'm really excited to read with you, Liz. And I think that we agreed I'm going to start us with a poem, and then the way we're going to do this today is just go back and forth between us and read poems that are inspired by what we just heard the other person read. And again, like Claire was saying, if you've got questions in between there, just let us know, and we're happy to chat about that, and then we'll take more Q&A at the end. And thank you so much, Claire, for those beautiful introductions. And you did gorgeously with the Italian, better than I do, actually. So I'm going to start with a poem called Geodes, which is about trying to keep faith in humanity, which is something that I have been having an increasingly hard time doing recently for pretty obvious reasons. And so I don't know if I fully all the time believe the things that I believe in this poem, but I want to try to connect with them. So, Geodes. I've stopped at that roadside, the stand with the jackalope, its giant concrete antler ears splitting blue desert sky into myth and middle and other myth and middle. And if we're not somewhere in the space between tuning fork prong and listening for garnets glittering so hard they metamorphosize to sound inside us, like the hum Lamont Young heard burn between telephone poles from the step-down transformer in the Idaho fields. If we're not that eternal drone that doesn't fit into unlikely and unpolished bodies and has to fit, the way the antelope steps down from its one skin into the voltage of self as other self. If there's not mythology like clumps of amethyst growing like flowers at the heart of everything, God help me, how do we continue if the words of anger on the phone call matter more than the line? And if it's madness to believe we as humans are good at some core level, as I tell a friend, a Black man, knowing the risk he takes just walking in a body with the perfect jagged teeth of, name your favorite jewel, invisible inside him, then yes, I might be living in the fugue-like disassociation of a gym state in which I keep believing that bright, gorgeous gaping in each of us will be enough to save us. We'll carry each other carefully as geodes to the cash register, humming its raga of 60 hertz, and ask to see inside each other's lives like crystal castles I visited as a girl who got to see a queen's rings gleaming like the green glass my mother wore as emeralds for recitals as a piano teacher, with rhinestone cat-eye glasses and a beehive hairdo, as if she were trying to pick up signals far beyond Chopin. The mad, beautiful sounds of the universe scorching the underworld inside her where she'd lost her father to war, and white blood cells of cancer would later form like pomegranate seeds blanched of their ruby. My friend looking at me as if I'd sprouted strange towers of ears saying, "You really believe people are good despite everything?" And my feeling myself glittering dumb with the costume jewelry glint of maybe only privilege, to think beneath the desert of this country, swastikas spray painted on cinder block like history is cheap, repeatable graffiti, outlines of bodies that the Black lives die in, bullets designed to peel back like petals to tumble inside the body, as if some bodies are circus rings, as if compassion has finally evaporated like the Mediterranean Sea entirely did during the Messinian salinity crisis. There might be, again, whole caverns forming, unmelting icicles taller than electric poles, geometric forests of pure glass arcing if someone crawled inside, the most unearthly, earthly light.
Wow, that was beautiful, Alexandra. Oh my gosh. The description of bullets especially. I also struggle with how good I want humans to be and how good humans actually are. And I think I have one that might work well after that. This one is called The Rhinoceros. My sister and I pretended to be rhinos, snapped the biggest thorns from our backyard roses, licked the bases, and stamped them onto the bridges of our sunburned noses. We didn't really know what rhinos did, so we mostly kicked up turf like cartoon bulls. We chased each other until our thorn horns fell off, and then we'd get more, snap them from the roses, lick and stick. They think it's a bargain, this rich snort powder pricier than cocaine, hangover remedy, cure for cancer, palm greasing party drug, a status symbol. But horns are nothing more than keratin, the same stuff as hair, as fingernails. How many poachers have brushed the sweat-damp hair from their eyes after they sawed off the horns? The rhino's side still heaving with breath. How many dirt-dark fingernails, black crescent moons around the neck of the sack? Cinch it slipshod, leave the animal to bleed. The last rhino in Vietnam, the last rhino in Mozambique. Tallow shell, yellow horn, a rusty guess how many are left. The only surety is there are so few to kill, their collective now no longer applies. A crash of rhinos, what an optimistic phrase. Now more appropriate, a dearth, a paucity, an absence, a memory of rhinos. When my daughter was 5, she ran straight into a rose bush. She wept, her soft cheek welted, a thorn tear of stippled red. After I pressed the rag and soothed her tears, I showed her how to turn the thorn around, point the sharp edge outward, push the base onto her bridge. Along with other childish summertime activities like wishing on dandelion seeds and nibbling at the sweet white-green base of grass stems, I taught my daughters how to be rhinos. Oh, rhinos, your horns are pointed outward and it's still not enough. I wish you teeth radiating from the jaw. I wish you venom. I wish you stingers and claws and opposable thumbs. I wish you the ability to speak. At the very least, I wish you rhizomes, rhino roots, concealed below ground, so you can hide now and rise again when we are better than we are today. Use those horns to break through the dirt. No talismans, these. They never were. Just tools. Sharp ivory sprouting from the ground. White keratin moons cresting everywhere.
My God, I love that poem.
Thank you.
So fantastic. I love the scope of it. I love starting with the playing rhinos and how wonderful those descriptions are, and then everything that it takes us into and becomes so serious, but then going back to your daughter at the end. I just love the scope of that's amazing.
Thank you.
I'm excited to read it on the page too. I think I'm going to follow that up with a poem about being young and in Girl Scouts, although to be quite honest, I was actually a campfire girl, but this is about a Girl Scout troop. And I've got a series of poems in this book or what we'll call Desire, that are in the voice of the Russian fairy tale witch Baba Yaga, who I started thinking of as this wise, kind of frightening and wise figure who could travel through time and comment on different contemporary issues. And so this is her addressing the girls of a Girl Scout troop, and also has some, not as much range, but some scope to its emotion. And I'm also reading this for Laura Reed, who I know likes this poem and is wonderfully here. So this is called Baba Yaga Invites Fort Worth Girl Scout Troop number 23 for a camp out. And it has an epigraph from the Junior Outdoors Badge Camper that says, "An overnight trip in the great outdoors brings you closer to nature and to your Girl Scout sisters. You can watch a sky full of stars, cook a meal on a stick, or share silly stories around the campfire." This is what Baba Yaga has to say. "Dear girls, it's normal to feel afraid at first in the woods. Trees can resemble strange old men with too many damp arms, and no light snaps on when it senses motion. Most of your life, you'll find, is like that, which is sometimes fortunate, sometimes sex standing up in the dark in a cell of an island fort with tourists passing just outside, oblivious, bleary from snorkeling. There won't be a badge for that. There won't be a badge for a lot of things. If you want safety, you might think again about your planet set. That pretty pink tent stitched to the moon is military surplus, big enough for a family of refugees. Some people never go home. Some turn into sticks, tell silly stories. Remember when we didn't have canvas for walls? Don't worry. These are first world woods, a few Texas pines, a man-made lake. The campfire smells like a PG forest fire, turns the air all jittery. Or maybe the air turns the fire, embers like ladybugs swarming a collapsing log. Didn't you earn science and technology? You know then about the topsy-turvy physics of roller coasters. That may or may not help you. There's no badge for remembering facts at useless times, no badge for the things you can do with your hands when you're frightened. Your postcards call what a good time ahead of yourself, like you're chasing yourself. It's easy to lose sight of perspective. That's why you have music. That's why you all sing, love of my life, I am crying, I am not dying, I am dancing, dancing along in the madness, there is no sadness, only the song of my soul. Doesn't that sound nice? Just look at the stars. Just listen to somebody's mother strum guitar to mean you, in chords everyone also recognizes. There's no badge to prepare you for the ways this is not preparation. The woods are self-cleaning, meaning even sound dies, meaning bugs, bones, pine needles stitching earth to earth like bridges stitch island to island in the Florida Keys. Mosquitoes blur the air like you're riding fast drunk in a future car. Your friend is driving, steering with his knees as he pours himself whiskey, tells stories of playing saxophone on cruise ships. Look at the stars, you'll say, leaning your head back. They look like brass, like fire glowing in the middle of the wilderness of sea. Girls, you'll set every log so carefully this first time someone teaches, crisscrossing, tamping down the last hot embers. You'll, most of you, outlive your own decisions.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh, that was beautiful. I'm trying to think of what I have that can even compare. You have such wonderful imagery in there. I'm trying to decide. Whose idea was this? Oh, it was mine. Okay. All right. I'm going to read The Magpie. I ended up writing a lot of poems that were not about endangered animals in my Endangered Animals book. In the pasture, magpies flip cow shit patties over with their feet and collect beetles, darkling, berrying, milkweed, dung. They feed their babies in the twig tangle nest they built together. He shaped the sticks. She smoothed mud into the cup, lined it with grass. The stream is dark with minnows and sludge. Semi-trucks herd the highway in the distance, bric-a-brac boxes hauling Doritos and patio chairs. Last week, when the birds lost one of their own to the road, they flocked around the fallen one, brought offerings of grass and insects. Her children's black bills nudged her body, mouths infant pink when they opened them to cry for her. Animal behaviorists say if we call this grief, we're anthropomorphizing. Occam's razor, I'm sorry, I don't know how to turn my notifications off. Occam's razor says the correct answer is the most obvious one. When it comes to conservation, magpies are classified as of least concern. Once again, I'm writing another endangered animal poem about an animal that isn't endangered. Maybe I just want the vulnerable to take note. See the way magpies switched from picking ticks off bison to swiping flies from cattle after the mass kill-off. How they've learned to recognize the faces of people who harm them. Study up on adapting when pasture turns into Home Depot and ranchers shoot them on sight. Move from trees to telephone poles. Build nests in warehouses. When all else fails, know how to mourn.
I love that.
The dinging and the dinging and the dinging.
Yes, you're getting some, yeah.
I would turn it off, but it's too late now. I'll figure it out for the next reading.
Right. Yeah. Oh my goodness, I don't know where to go from there. I love that. And I keep going back and forth between things. I'm actually going to read a poem from some of the Home Depot reference, some of the like freight, the things being carried through in that poem in the midst of that landscape made me think of this. So this is from my book, The Wise and Foolish Builders, and it's called Port of Oakland. And I moved to Moscow, Idaho from Oakland, California 9 years ago. So Port of Oakland. As the recession lengthened, the freeway grew louder, as though everyone drove now instead of working. A pitch map of engines droning and whining past our block, semis shirring and shifting down into our sleep. We traded stress streams, a shark fighting a zebra, a stadium of students facing away, blood in the waves. Omens were the rush of strangers' tires, dark, incessant, the lists, the push of rain against our leaning chimney, what we needed to fix or leave or try to love. Sometimes we fled to watch container ships unloading vast identical boxes stamped Hanjin. We could pretend they held anything we wanted, mysterious, sealed, like the paper fortune tellers we used to fold as children, names of boys, cities, cars, jobs, secreted in triangles, each future different. Rob, Brian, London, Paris, Portia, Doctor. Pirates had come back in the news. Kids from Africa stealing guns and ships, black market cargo. At first it sounded unreal, like dragons lifting goats from the city or banshees seagull screech. We drank wine at the top of the lookout tower until the night cops, locking up, asked what we were doing, waiting for the future. Hanjin, 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 Hanjin.
Wow, that was perfect. Oh my gosh. Also, I think I got the notifications figured out. So, dinging and dinging. Okay, I think I have a good follow-up again with the freeway and the driving and the semis moving. Let's see. All right. This one is the California Condor. The week before we left California, I went on a field trip to the San Diego Zoo. Sat on the bus between my best friend and the boy I liked, our legs sticking to the hot vinyl seat. You were the first thing we saw, and my friends weren't impressed. Fish gray legs, pasty bill, a frill of black feathers around your flagrantly wrinkled neck. Pretty you weren't, but you were impressive. Your wingspan twice my height. Back then, only 22 of you left, collected and bred in captivity. I learned that you flushed with emotion, blushed like I did when Justin waved to me across the soccer field in the morning, my hot cheeks blessedly obscured by the Celadon Torrance smog. This fact endeared you to me. That and the way you couldn't vocalize, only hiss or grunt, another common state of mine at that age. So large you could be confused with a distant airplane, sort of how I was mistaken for something exotic when I arrived at my new school in Washington, a California girl captured and corralled in the Pacific Northwest. A pecking order, competitive play behavior, we both understood this. Condor chicks are born with open eyes, but take a week to leave their cave of shell. They know a good thing when they see it. I swore I'd always be a California girl, cried when I sang along with that Beach Boys song. At the San Diego Zoo 30 years later, I point you out to my daughters, explain how we are both the comeback kids. The last time I saw you, I thought you were done for. The man with the flower in his mouth. My own first loss, a fist of grief in my 4th grade chest. Now you are thriving, from 22 to over 300, and I'd never give up my misty northwest corner of the world. A condor can soar for miles without a single flap of its wings. When we drove up the Pacific Coast Highway, I didn't want to leave. Yet I couldn't explain, when I looked out of the moving van window, why I dreamed of being a truck driver, gliding long distances, going as far as I could, as long as I could.
I love that closing image. I had no idea condors can fly for over a mile without moving their wings.
Yes, yeah, they're immense and amazing.
That is an insane fact. Okay, I'm going to stick with immensity and California, actually. And there were the planes going over. There's multiple things that made me think of this. So I'm not a native Californian, but I went out there on one trip with my family when I was young, and we had to go to the Giant Artichoke restaurant in Castroville because I was such a fan of artichokes. I have been my whole life. And so they have a gigantic artichoke statue outside. So this is about that and other things. It's called the Giant Artichoke. And it has an epigraph from Marilyn Monroe, who said, "I'm so many people. Sometimes I wish I was just me." I am a child posing beneath 30 feet of leaves that bloom and bristle like the sound of fighter jets, drilling above desert highways where my mother reads each peeling billboard, because without words, what are we but ourselves, inarticulate as the sky, as the fighter jets to explain their sound, as my mother's father to explain how it felt to drown, though she listened, peeling back the ocean leaf by leaf. I am beneath the fanned, hooked shelter of those leaves, matryoshka inside my mother's grief. Our clawfoot bathtub drain repeating how a ship can sink and sink and sink. His dying fanned like leaves, nesting the choke, nesting the gray-green heart I learned to find. Heaps of clawed debris repeating how hunger peels back, and underneath, hunger's more pointed leaves. I learned love as rituals of hunger, a nest of thistles around the heart. At best, temporary gleams of butter. I stand as my mother's camera peels back to fields, then zooms to me in this promised land. The sunlight lemoning massive plaster leaves, permanent, gleaming, as if they'll fill our hungers with what we cannot eat. My grandmother, who lived to 80 in the desert sun, wrote in her journal once that none of it seemed real. Nothing she ate, nothing she saw, not even her hunger. The real ended at a railing in World War II, the sea bright as butter on a child's mouth, unwritably blue as the satin sash of a beauty queen. Here in Castroville, Maryland, barely not Norma Jean, was crowned in a sea of thistles, first artichoke festival queen, starlet pinned to herself, the long spaces between. Here in Castroville, I am in artichoke heaven. We've come from the desert, my grandmother's house, where, pinned between waking and dream, I've seen a saguaro stand by the couch, raising heaven's strange arms like a man on a ship. Her lost father followed Marilyn too, slipped inside her dreamy smile, her hands raising artichokes in one ad, like green grenades. Still as a cast of myself at dawn, I saw the recliner raised its arms, but could not follow logic to believe the world was ever one thing. I'd seen walls peel back. I stood beside head-high leaves, child posed at the center of this picture that is not of me.
That was lovely. Oh my gosh. And I want artichokes now. Oh. I think, let's see, I don't have any of my kind of plant-based poems in front of me, but I have a newer one that is sort of Halloween-y and has some wonderful nature elements that might fit in well here. Let's see. Okay, and it's relatively short. I've just been writing ghost poems. This one is The Ghosts Grow Up. The ghosts grew up in a cheap house sliding down the hill. Their ghost parents propped it up with maple trees and cedar stumps, blessed gravel with ectoplasm, and buried it at the four corners, twined it with blackberry vines and morning glory. Still, the house slid. When the ghosts went down the hill to the creek, they could forget about the slipping house. They let tadpoles swim through their fingers and watched legs unfurl behind them like leaves on twigs. watched red squirrels turn gray, gray squirrels turn black. Snakes fell through the tunnels of their own crisp skin. When winter came, the creek scabbed over with ice and everything slept. Frogs, squirrels, vines, and snakes. Everything but the ghosts and the house, creeping, creeping toward the creek.
So that's a new project of ghost poems?
Yes, yeah.
Neat. Okay, I have to go to back to The Wise and Foolish Builders, which is all about largely about the large, strange house that Sarah Winchester built in San Jose, California in the late 1800s, supposedly to house or confuse the ghosts of everybody killed with Winchester rifles. And so it's many ghost poems. And I'm just going to read a short one that's called The Blueprint. That's about her building. Because the prophecy said build, this room hinged to sky, a doorway, a sill, a step, a floor, a chimney with nothing to burn. The ghosts have brick dust on their clothes, gunpowder bones. All night the hammers christen wood, railings, spindles, joists, baseboards, cupboards in cupboards, frames, posts, hallways, the only way to life, this labyrinth. A window to a window, trapdoor, skylight, stairway, each small step eternally divided. The ghosts have sawdust in their hair, demolished wings, new sketches for forgiveness. Ballroom, bedroom, cupola, carriage house, walls around every emptiness.
That was wonderful. Oh my gosh, the Winchester house, that's my favorite. Love it. I might have to read another ghost poem because it's Halloweeny, you know?
It is. This is the closest we're going to be reading to Halloween. I think we should do it. People can tell us in the chat if you don't think we should be doing this, but
right, that's true. They can yell at us. Yeah, this one is sort of sprawling, but I don't know, it's fun to write. This one is called The Ghosts Are Divorcing My Sister. The ghosts are divorcing my sister, as if the rope was never knotted by her hands, no bowline or cleat or round turn and 2 half hitches, as if they hadn't sailed up the coast through fields of bioluminescence, cycled through turns of sleep and wake at the dark bow watching for rocks in the water. As if the ghosts hadn't brought all their work friends over for her Prohibition-era cocktails, just like the ones the ghosts remembered, the genuine article, bathtub gin, as if she hadn't soured her wrist, perfecting the lemon twist, spent her savings filling the cabinet with antique Libby glasses, their perfect snappable stems. As if she hadn't made excuses to their friends for the ghost's behavior, their jokey meanness, and the way they passed out on the lawn after drinking and stayed there for all the neighbors to see on the way to work in the morning, ghosts like white fungus lumps sprouting snores on the grass. The ghosts took the fireplace brick by brick, patted passing girls' asses with mortar powdered hands, buried old baby shoes in the ashes for her to find later. The ghosts painted mustaches on her dead mother's baby photos and said, "What's the big deal? We're dead and we don't mind." They scratched the table she varnished, slashed the chairs she reupholstered, cut the brakes on the car she fixed, tore down the curtains she'd sewn, smashed the jars of tomatoes she'd grown and canned. The ghosts are divorcing my sister, as if they could ever be more than mist and drift, as if once, long ago, they believed they could stop moving, be solid, as if she hadn't known from the first. Back on the ocean, when the waters push against the boat's bow sounded just exactly like someone off in the distance screaming.
Oh my gosh, I love this series.
Thank you. It's fun to write.
Yeah, I thought I was writing one poem about Sarah Winchester because I thought her story was so interesting. And then as I started doing research, next thing I knew, it's like 5 years later, and I had this entire book of poems and wasn't sure I was ever going to be able to stop writing them either. So,
And why would you? Just
well,
like it's just art begets life, life begets art.
I think the bathtub gin inspired me to go a different direction. Though, so I'm going to read a poem which is about a death. So it's close enough to sticking with the ghosts, but this is back from the new book, and it's called Tabloid Elegy. And it came about because I was doing some research in 1920s American weeklies on a early 20th century artist model who's a central figure in this book. And anyway, I came across this article, a true story about an American woman who had killed herself. And this was the very judgmental little blurb in the paper, which said, "The suicide of this attractive American girl adds another name to the list of many women of refinement, breeding, and culture who have in recent years come to a shocking end through disregard of the fundamental law of morality and an immoderate love of luxury and gaiety." So, and this borrows some language from the article. Tabloid Elegy. In the page count of death, you're a scant halfway. Your string of pearls swung, innocent as a jump rope, to the fold. As if you were still a child at a game of double dutch, skip, sidewalk and sky, skip, Paris and bathtub gin, skip, virtue, stockings on the radiator, legs bare as new neon tubes. How could you know the charming host meant you when he said dancing girls, said entertainment? His accent bristled softly like cloves piercing an orange, a pomander hanging in a room you kept entering, a little dizzy. What's that he said about the 7 veils? You liked the new revolving doors, how it felt to spin in a storm of your own making. Who cared if Van Cannel invented them because he didn't like to hold the door for ladies? Skip being a lady. Skip being there at all. Those pillows like satin lamps, iridescence burning into morning. You should have been able to wash off anything in all those fountains. How could you know the fundamental law of doors, the ones that keep opening, keep closing right behind you, right below your breasts, more florid headlines. Choir girl ruined by hate, Italian chef sued for serving queer prunes. Why Mrs. Hadley Peck had to kill herself. Crashed balloonist lives by eating pigeons. Skip. No humiliations.
Nice. Yeah. I'm going to kind of go off of that with the kind of judgment sort of felt in that poem. This one is, again, from the Endangered Animals book, but it's a lot of the book is about being a woman in this world too. And this is one of those poems. Something that might be important to know from this one is that trumpeter swans, even though they were one of the success stories as far as the programs put in place to keep them safe, they've been dying off again because they keep eating poisonous lead shot from bullets, hunters shooting other animals, and then the swans, since they have gizzards, they have to eat gravel and small pebbles, and so they eat this poisonous lead shot and it gets ground up in their system, and so swans all over the place are dying because they're getting poisoned. So this one is the trumpeter swan. So now you think it's safe, your numbers stretching into tens of thousands, your white armored breast. Stare that hunter down. He can't touch you. He has to make do with doves and snow geese, those lesser creatures. He can't harm you now. That red flannel shirt, those hands chipped with scars, the blue latitude of his eyes. Fill your infinite neck with stones like you were born to do. Your dusty interior craves gravel and broken glass. Your invincible organs master all hard things. You thrive on what kills others. It doesn't feel like a mistake, the poisonous lead shot, the innocuous bloom in your belly. It feels like instinct, like something you would do again and again, like you were fated to paint his corrosive portrait inside your night-blind body.
Wow. The blue latitude of his eyes and the infinite, was it the neck, filling your neck with stones? Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'm going to follow that with a poem called End Times, which does not have the guns in it, but I think resonates off some of it. End Times. It's why God invented abstract art, so we'd have a way of imagining that torn open pink, that storm cloud and caution line and nowhere we've been yet. Japanese brush strokes, meet Hiroshima, meet Pandora's Black Friday sales box, all its curling ribbon, pretty wrapping. We opened it. We knelt there laughing at the... I was joking about God. I'm serious about how it feels to watch the world unravel. At the Science Museum, walls of glaciers photographed before and after, like perfect weight loss ads. It's irreversible, this going on living. Rain again in Texas. My ex-husband texting each day's weather, new paintings. Crosses these days instead of splashes. This is all foretold, he texts, in Revelation. You can read it. He knows the statistics on suicide among the bipolar. He's winning. God may be his new abstraction. Triangles, maybe beams from heaven. Sunny, strangely warm for November. I've quit saying climate change because he'll just bring up horsemen. So much art is titled Untitled for good reason. Temperatures mean, hello, I'm alive, like it's neutral. I'm the one with a car, too much flying. It's cloudy today. There are squiggles like confetti at New Year's. Fear sparkled up under laughter, fraying ropes, an exploded sun. What do you think he texts before nowhere near done?
Nice. Disaster poems. I think I have a good one to follow up with that. And maybe it goes back a little bit to, you know, wanting humans to be better than we are and always making mistakes, but I don't know, it's sort of nihilist, but maybe nature is better off without us anyway. So speaking of disaster, but also, I don't know, I think this one is strangely optimistic too. This one is Chevolski's horse. Here they are thriving in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Hardy, gold-coated thing of extremes, of grassy steppes and shrublands, highest highs and lowest lows. They shoulder the burgeoning recovery among wolves and ravens, span the Samosli self-settlers, the sturdy evacuation refusers. The world's worst nuclear disaster gave way to this. Glints of sunlight in the reactor shadows, brown voles in the paint-peeled kitchen, the silvered babushka making moonshine from her garden potatoes. Former fire breaks are now sand ash highways for the wild survivors. Elk, moose, badger, boar, rabbit. Swans coast across the radioactive cooling pond. The red forest needles rusted to dust. Beaver, rove deer, brown bear, fox. The old man trowels up summer lettuce from the poisoned dirt. Wild, isn't it, to turn his back on the government-funded tenements in Kiev, to choose instead an illegal, short, rich life in the home he loved. They all suspire the toxic and thrive. Trees fall from beavers' teeth one by one. Land returns to bog, becomes what it was 100 years ago. 30 years post-meltdown, 1,000 square miles of wild. The half-life of cesium-137 decayed into barium. A 1986 heirloom, this patchy spread of fallout. When given a choice between civilization and radiation, the wild decide to burn.
That's amazing. Should we end there to open it up for questions? I feel like we kind of hit end times, but hopeful end times for both of us. That might be the right place to open that.
I hope we haven't reached the end times.
Again, they're the hopeful end times. They're the
right? Like the world will be fine without us. It's good.
I have so enjoyed this and appreciate the wide range of poetry here. I love the ghost poems and the disaster poems, and I also really like the ones that are inspired by little bits of history. Alexandra, I was wondering how much of your poetry is inspired by things that have happened in history or particular people in history.
I'm glad you asked that, because I wanted to ask Liz basically the same question about her research process. And
Awesome.
I'll answer it, and then Perfect. If I can throw it over to her, because I was so curious about that. Well, I never thought, my running joke about this is that my mother absolutely loved history, and I took very boring history classes in high school and thought I wasn't particularly interested in history, which seems so preposterous to me now. So I never thought that I was going to become kind of a poet of history. And then it was honestly the Sarah Winchester story. When I started researching that story, which eventually led me to do archival research at the Buffalo Bill Historical Center in Cody, Wyoming, and then also at History San Jose, and look at her letters and papers. And just the further I got into that story, the more fascinated I became, and the more I realized that there are the most bizarre stories in history, and that I didn't need to make nearly as much up if I was just drawing on this material. There was just this rich, amazing world of sensory details and characters and things that I thought commented really interestingly in that book. I was really interested in looking at early language about Winchester guns and thinking about how that maps onto the current American unfortunate love affair with guns. And so that then, actually, I found the Audrey Munson story, who became a central figure in the newer book during the research for Sarah Winchester and everything. So that has continued. And so again, I just feel as though I try to introduce my students to this as well, because I feel as though when people feel as though they don't know what they want to write about, so often going and reading a primary source is just the richest way to get ideas. And it just teaches me so much. And what I was loving so much, your poetry is so beautiful, Liz, but I was loving how much I was learning the whole time in the process too. And that's one of my favorite ways to learn about the world, is through reading poetry. And I'm curious about your interplay between research and writing, how much of that you front load the research, how much you go to research as you're writing, because I kind of go back and forth between those.
Yeah, I'd say I go back and forth as well. I was, again, just real fast, particularly struck with your historical poems, and I posted your Theta Bara poem the other day, and my dad raised me watching silent films and old movies, and so I am thinking he's maybe watching this right now, but he probably really enjoys your stuff too, particularly. But as far as my research, I definitely go back and forth. And gosh, my answer is so unbelievably prosaic, because I do a lot. Don't tell my boss, but like between patients, I'm just like on the historychannel.com or all that's interesting, or Atlas Obscura. I'm just kind of like, or Wikipedia. Honestly, I just do a lot of reading on Wikipedia. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but that's kind of in between my regular life. I just try to fit it in. I don't know. And then I just go off on tangents when I'm interested in something that I want to know absolutely everything about it. Kind of like you were saying with the Winchester house, it starts as just one thing, and then the next thing you know, you're practically an expert on it.
Have both of you been writing poetry since you were very small, or not?
I have. Yeah, I've been writing poems since I was maybe 9 or 10. Terrible, terrible poems. I remember something like "The tide is going out." I don't remember. I won't subject you to it. Terrible poems, but I enjoyed it.
I did write poems too. I wanted to be a novelist from the time I was young. And so I never thought that I was going to really do anything with poetry. And I still didn't think that when I went to college to be a French major. And then I took an intro to poetry class and had an incredibly supportive professor who said, this is what you need to be doing. And then I ended up a poet. So I didn't, but that class really opened everything up for me because I hadn't read contemporary poetry. And so I remember the first time reading like Lynn Emanuel's Frying Trout When Drunk and some other poems like that included a lot of details of the contemporary world and realizing that you could write about the things that were around you. Because I was reading a lot of, you know, like old white men with iambic pentameter, which was good for, you know, getting that in my ear. But I just didn't realize that the world that I lived in could be a poem.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
What are, speaking of the world that we're living in, what are you writing about the pandemic? Or are you avoiding writing about the pandemic?
I have not been writing at all really during this time. I've tried here and there. I feel like I'm getting ready again. I've been doing a lot of visual art that doesn't require my brain to be doing too much. So I've been doing a lot of embroidery with photography and stuff like that, because I feel like it lets my mind kind of relax. I'm still going to work, so, and everyone is so amped up. So my work days are just more stressful than usual and a little more exhausting than usual. And then I come home and have kiddos who need help with homework and that sort of thing. So the writing just doesn't seem to be happening for me right now, but I feel close to getting there again. I'm really impressed with the people who are able to turn this experience into something worthwhile. And I've definitely noticed that I've been reading a lot of wonderful submissions to Sweet Tree and various things that have been published where people are really turning this into beautiful work. How about you, Alexandra?
I've seen that for Broadsided too, and I'm seeing it with my students. They're writing incredibly, and I am also really struggling right now. I got asked by the Inlander in Spokane to write a poem about the pandemic early on, and I didn't think I had anything to say, and then that led to a poem, but that's the only thing I've written really directly about it. But I'm struggling too because I was working on a project, I am still working on a project, but of poems that repurpose language from American patriotic songs to comment on contemporary events and to recontextualize them. And that has actually gotten increasingly harder to write the more bizarre politics get in the US. And it feels hard to, I mean, what felt like it was kind of pointed but also subtle in some way commentary now feels like I either have to wade way further into what's happening or it's just hard to find the right angle right now. So I've been struggling with that material. And that was kind of interesting. I was away on sabbatical in Cardiff, Wales for a year before this. And that gave me some interesting perspective on that project. And I was looking forward to being back in the States and thinking about it and writing. And then of course I was back 6 months and then the world completely overturned with the pandemic. And now I'm still kind of trying to reckon with that. So yeah, anyway, I'm in the same shape. I'm just, kind of collecting ideas and beating my head against poems.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
There was something that you said, Liz. You said that I don't have any of my plant-based poems in front of me, and that had just like struck a little chord with me. Like you got to do a collection like plant-based poems, plant-based poetry for vegans, or I don't know. It was just I love that, like literally plant-based poetry.
Yeah.
Or at least please just write a poem about plant-based poetry.
Maybe I will. I feel almost like writing poems about plants is it's so easy. It's almost like cheating because you really can just list plant names because they're already so beautiful. You hardly have to do anything at all.
Yeah. Well, I also love that you both do ghost poetry. I think that's awesome.
Happy.
Those were fun to hear because I am intrigued by all things ghosty. So,
right.
Yeah, so I'm hoping if anybody in the audience, if you have questions for these two, now is the time to type them into the chat. We got lots of great feedback throughout the event, people chiming in. I also have to say that, let's see, I think Alexandra, you quoted the blue latitude eyes. Is that? That was great. That was awesome. Yeah, and I think that there were other people in the audience who. What was the name of that poem?
That was the Trumpeter Swan.
Trumpeter Swan. Yes. Gosh, it was gorgeous. Yeah.
And they've been flying overhead now, heading south for the winter. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, I want to thank you both so much. This was just delightful. Such a treat. And I, of course, being the bookseller in the room, I want to remind folks that if you click on that green button centrally located on the screen that says purchase books here, you can buy the books from Village Books. And we all of us would appreciate it. Do either of you have any parting words?
I just want to say thank you, Claire, and thank you, Alexandra. This was really fun, and I love your work. It's just so beautiful, and I love your book. And Baba Yaga is just...
I know. Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. I just finished reading a book about Bob. It was actually Gregory Maguire's young adult book, Egg and Spoon. You know, he wrote Wicked, but his young adult book, Egg and Spoon, about Baba Yaga. So she's fresh in my brain, and that was great. It's like advice from Baba Yaga. Like, here's how it is.
Fun to inhabit her voice. It allowed me to say a lot of things in those poems that I would not otherwise have. Yeah, I just want to echo the thanks. This has just been, it's so fun to read poems back and forth in that way and just keep being inspired by one another. And I just absolutely love your work, Liz. This was so wonderful. We did get a question here.
I see that. Yeah, advice for poetry students. Who wants to tackle advice for poetry students?
Read widely and be patient with yourself, and revise and revise and revise, and find trusted readers who will be honest and compassionate with you about your work, and then read some more.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say too. Just read a ton, and I don't know, just don't be afraid to write about the small things, because sometimes the small things are the things you know really well. And I also have rediscovered how much I love poetry, and what initially drew me to it. The podcast Poetry Unbound, it's a shoot off of the On Being podcast, that he just like reads a poem and then talks about it and then reads it again at the end. And so it's like 10 minutes usually, maybe. And it's just kind of a lovely way to rediscover poetry in small pieces.
What was it called again? Poetry
Unbound.
Poetry Unbound.
Yeah.
And it's part of the On Being series? Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it. So thank you again. Thanks everybody again for attending. And everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and don't forget to vote.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Right. Thank you
again.
Bye-bye.